The Frequency of Silence Part 1. The Static Osgood, Indiana. September 14, 1964. The air inside the stolen 1963 Chevrolet Impala tasted of stale tobacco and ozone. It was a humid Tuesday morning in the Rust Belt. The kind of day where the heat radiated off the asphalt in shimmering waves, blurring the horizon. Elias Vance sat in the passenger seat, his eyes fixed not on the Farmers and Merchants Bank across the street, but on the customized metal briefcase resting on his lap. He looked more like a traveling typewriter salesman than a man about to commit a felony. At 36, Vance had the sharp, angular face of a man who calculated risks for a living. He wore a nondescript grey suit, a thin black tie, and the calm expression of a priest at a funeral. "Engine temp is climbing, boss," Ray Slick Miller muttered from the driver's seat. Ray was 24, a kid with grease permanently etched into his fingerprints and a nervous energy that made him tap the steering wheel incessantly. "We sit here too long, she's gonna boil over." "Patience, Ray," Elias said, his voice level. He checked his watch, a Hamilton Field watch he'd worn since Korea. 10:02 a.m. The morning coffee rush was over. The lunch crowd hadn't arrived yet. The lobby would be at its emptiest. In the back seat, Arthur Sterling adjusted the collar of his work jacket. He and Thomas Neil Kowalski were dressed in generic blue coveralls. Sterling, the face of the operation, flashed a charming, predatory grin. Kowalski, a mountain of a man who smelled of coal dust and Old Spice, simply racked the slide of his pump-action Ithaca 37 shotgun. "Clack clack. Easy, Nail," Elias warned. "Only if necessary. We are ghosts today. We don't hurt anyone unless the world ends." Elias opened the briefcase. Inside lay a maze of vacuum tubes, copper coils, and capacitors, all wired to a heavy-duty battery pack. It was a crude but powerful wideband spark gap transmitter, tuned specifically to the VHF low-band frequencies used by the Indiana State Police and the local sheriff's department. "Ready?" Elias asked. "Born ready," Sterling replied. Elias flipped 3 toggle switches. The device let out a high-pitched whine that quickly settled into a barely audible hum. The red pilot light glowed. Elias picked up a standard police scanner he had mounted on the dash. Usually, it chattered with the mundane dispatch of rural law enforcement. Now, it emitted nothing but a thick, aggressive wall of white noise. "Static. The ears are deaf," Elias said. "Go." Sterling and Kowalski exited the car, pulling nylon stockings over their faces as they hit the sidewalk. They moved with purpose, not running, just walking fast. They pushed through the heavy double doors of the bank. Elias stayed in the car, his hand hovering over the transmitter's gain dial. This was his role, the anchor. He watched the street, a woman pushing a stroller, a mailman half a block down. Normalcy. Inside the bank, the scene exploded into controlled chaos. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling's voice boomed, projecting easily across the marble floor, "please remain calm. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation insures your money. This," he gestured to Kowalski, who leveled the shotgun at the ceiling, "is just an unscheduled withdrawal. Floor. Now." The 5 customers and 3 tellers dropped. There was no screaming, just the collective gasp of shock. Kowalski vaulted the counter with surprising agility for his size. He grabbed the head teller, a trembling man in glasses. "The drawers, now. No die packs, or I make you eat them," Kowalski growled. The teller's hand shook as he reached under the counter. Elias, watching from the car, knew exactly what was happening. The teller was pressing the silent alarm button, a direct line to the local precinct. In the station 2 miles away, the dispatch board should have lit up. The dispatcher should have been radioing the 2 patrol cars sitting at the diner on Main Street. But inside the Impala, the scanner remained a wash of static. 30 seconds. Elias murmured to himself, watching the sweep hand of his watch. Inside, Kowalski was shoving bundles of cash into a canvas duffel bag. 20s, 10s, 50s. He ignored the loose change. Speed was the only currency that mattered. "Time, gentlemen." Sterling announced, tipping his hat to a sobbing woman on the floor. "Thank you for your patronage." They burst out of the bank doors exactly 90 seconds after entering. They dove into the back of the Chevy. "Go!" Kowalski shouted. Ray Miller slammed the car into gear. The tires chirped just a little as the heavy sedan surged forward, swinging away from the curb. They turned left on Main, passing right by the diner where the 2 patrol cars sat. The officers were inside, drinking coffee, completely oblivious. Their radios, clipped to their belts, were hissing with interference, but they likely assumed it was just a bad atmospheric day or a faulty tower. They had no idea a felony had just occurred 3 blocks away. "We're clear," Ray laughed, the adrenaline finally hitting him. "Look at them, sitting ducks. Keep it under 40, Ray," Elias commanded, his eyes glued to the rearview mirror. "Don't give them a reason to look up from their donuts." They rolled out of Osgood, the town fading into the cornfields. The silence on the scanner was absolute. It was the most beautiful sound Elias had ever heard. It was the sound of a system failing, beaten by physics and preparation. 5 miles out, on a dirt road nestled between tall stalks of corn, Elias flipped the switches off. The hum died. Immediately, the police scanner exploded with noise .10 to 90 at farmers and merchants. All units, all units. Suspects fled in a gray vehicle, possibly a Ford or a Chevy. Dispatch, I can't copy. Your signal is garbage. They're waking up, Elias said, a thin smile touching his lips. He closed the briefcase. Too late. That was magic, boss, Kowalski breathed from the back seat, clutching the bag to his chest. It wasn't magic, Nell, Elias said, staring at the endless road ahead. It was engineering. He looked at the bag. Maybe $15,000. Enough to float them for a few months. Enough to plan the next one. But Elias knew this was just the proof of concept. The static had held. The silence had protected them. Next stop, Kentucky, Elias said, lighting a lucky strike. Ray, find us a place to switch cars. The mechanics had officially opened for business. Part 2. The Architect, Detroit, Michigan. 6 months earlier, March 1964. The eviction notice on the kitchen table was not written in anger. It was written in calm, bureaucratic Helvetica. It stated, in polite legal terms, that the Vance family farm in Ohio land that had been in Elias' bloodline for 3 generations was now the property of the Midwest Sovereign Bank due to a readjustment of mortgage assets. Elias Vance sat in the dark of his rented apartment, the paper glowing faintly in the street lamp lights filtering through the blinds. He didn't drink. He didn't throw things. He simply field stripped his service pistol, a Colt M1911, and cleaned it with the same methodical precision he had used to repair radio lines under mortar fire in Incheon. He wasn't angry at the bank tellers. He was angry at the machine, the system. He had served his country, studied engineering on the G. Bill, and followed every rule. The rules had changed, but nobody had told him. If the system is a machine, Elias whispered to the empty room, reassembling the slide spring, then it can be dismantled. He didn't want to break the machine. He wanted to re-engineer the flow of capital, specifically, from their vaults to his pockets. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed tools. He needed mechanics. The driver he found raced Slick Miller in a chop shop in Hamtramck, buried waist deep in the engine bay of a stolen Ford Galaxy. The air smelled of oil and burnt rubber. Ray was barely 24, a kid with restless eyes and hands that moved faster than his mouth. I hear you can drive, Elias said, leaning against a stack of tires. Ray wiped his hands on a greasy rag, smirking. I can drive anything with wheels, Pops, and some things without them. Who's asking? Someone who needs to get from point A to point B in under 3 minutes, regardless of traffic, weather, or who is following. Cops. Ray raised an eyebrow. Competition. Elias lied smoothly. I run high-value courier jobs. I need a ghost behind the wheel. Ray spat on the concrete. I don't do courier work. Boring. $5,000 a job, Elias said. Ray dropped the rag. The smirk vanished. When do we start? The face Arthur Sterling was holding court at the bar of the Pontchartrain Hotel, wearing a tailored Italian suit that likely cost more than Ray's entire existence. He was laughing with a group of businessmen, spinning a tale about oil rights in Texas. Elias watched from a corner booth. He knew Sterling wasn't an oil man. He was a grifter who had bounced checks from Boston to Chicago. Elias waited until the businessmen left, their wallets lighter from investments. He slid into the seat next to Sterling. "The suit is nice, Arthur," Elias said quietly, "but the shoes are a dead giveaway. Scuffed heels. You're running out of road." Sterling's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "Do I know you, friend? I know you owe the Gambino Associates in Chicago 20 grand. I know you're burning bridges faster than you can cross them." Elias placed a napkin on the bar. On it, he had written a number. 10%. "What's this?" Sterling asked. "Your cut. For talking. For charm. For being the man everyone trusts while the house burns down behind them." Sterling looked at the napkin, then at Elias. He saw the cold calculation in the engineer's eyes. Him listening. The muscle Thomas Nail Kowalski was harder to find. He was working off the book's demolition in the ruins of an old textile factory. Elias watched the big man swing a sledgehammer. Every strike was precise. He didn't just hit the wall, he hit the stress points. He understood structure. Elias approached him during a break. Kowalski was drinking water from a mason jar, his face covered in white dust. "You look like a man who knows how things are built," Elias said. "I know how they fall down," Kowalski grunted. He had the thick accent of the Polish neighborhoods and hands the size of shovels. "I have a project," Elias said. "It involves excavation, heavy lifting, and keeping people calm. Is it legal? It pays in cash, and it hurts the banks." Kowalski paused. His father had lost his pension when the local credit union folded. He screwed the lid back on his jar. "I hate banks." The tall 2 months later, the team was gathered in a derelict farmhouse 40 miles outside of Cincinnati. It was isolated, surrounded by woods, invisible to prying eyes. This was their base. In the center of the barn sat their most important investment, a 1964 Pontiac GTO, dark blue, almost black in the dim light. It was a beast of a car, brand new, but to Elias, it was just a raw material. "Ray," Elias commanded, walking around the vehicle with a clipboard. "Strip the rear seats. We need the weight reduction. Install heavy-duty shocks in the back to handle the load of the coin. I want the suspension reinforced." "Got it," Ray said, his eyes gleaming as he looked at the 389 cubic inch V8 engine. "He'll tune the carb, maybe bore out the cylinders. Shall do 120 without breaking a sweat." "Now," Elias turned to the big man, "I need you to dig a pit in the woods, lined with concrete. That's where we store the hardware when we aren't working. Nothing stays in the house." "Arthur," Elias pointed to a stack of maps and blueprints on a table. "You're going to school. I want you to learn the layout of every county bank in Kentucky and Indiana. You need to know their hours, their cleaning schedules, and the names of their managers." Elias walked to his workbench in the corner. It was covered in schematics, soldering irons, and police radio manuals. "What about you, boss?" Ray asked, popping the hood of the GTO. "What are you building?" Elias picked up a vacuum tube, inspecting the filament. "I'm building our invisibility cloak, Ray, and the plan." He unrolled a large architectural drawing of a bank in Kentucky. He circled the ventilation system with a red marker. "The next job won't be a smash and grab," Elias said, looking at his crew. "We're going to walk in through the front door, and they're going to hold it open for us. We're going to be the people they trust the most." "Who's that?" Sterling asked, pouring himself a drink. "Workmen," Elias smiled. "Everybody ignores the repair crew." The wind howled outside the barn, rattling the loose boards. Inside, the Gito's engine roared to life, a deep, guttural sound that signaled the beginning of a war against the economy. The mechanics were assembled. Part 3. Under construction, Lexington, Kentucky, May 21, 1965. The white Ford Econoline van pulled up to the curb in front of the Bluegrass Trust Bank. Just as the morning sun hit the brick facade, on the side of the van, a magnetic decal read, "Statewide Structural and Maintenance." It was 9:15 a.m. The bank had been open for 15 minutes. Arthur Sterling stepped out of the passenger side, adjusting his hard hat. He held a clipboard thick with official-looking yellow carbon paper. He wore a high-visibility vest over a crisp white shirt and tie. He looked important, annoyed, and precisely like the kind of bureaucrat no one wanted to argue with. "Showtime," Sterling muttered. From the back of the van, Elias Vance and Thomas Nail Kowalski emerged, dressed in grey coveralls stained with paint and plaster. They carried heavy toolboxes and a rolled-up canvas drop cloth. Hidden inside the rolled canvas was a disassembled M1 carbine. Inside the toolboxes were not wrenches, but empty canvas sacks and a singular, heavy pry bar. Ray Miller stayed in the driver's seat, the engine idling with a rough purr. He was reading a comic book, seemingly bored, but his eyes darted to every rearview mirror every 4 seconds. Inside the bank, the air smelled of floor wax and old money. Sterling marched straight to the manager's desk, bypassing the line of 3 customers. The manager, a balding man named Mr. Abernathy, looked up in surprise. "Mr. Abernathy," Sterling barked, not waiting for an answer. "Inspector Davis, State Building Commission. We have a report of a load-bearing fracture in the chaotic arch above your vault. I need to clear the lobby immediately for a seismic stress test." Abernathy blinked, adjusting his glasses. I wasn't notified of any inspection. We have customers. You want a notification?" Sterling slammed the clipboard on the desk. "Here's a notification. If that lintel cracks while Mrs. Jones is depositing her Social Security check, the state will sue this bank into the Stone Age. Now, do you want to argue paperwork? Or do you want to keep your ceiling from collapsing?" It was a masterclass in confidence. Vance watched from the door, impressed. Sterling was playing the role of the petty tyrant perfectly. People in the 60s trusted men with clipboards and titles. They didn't question authority. All right, Abernathy stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I'll ask everyone to step outside for a moment." "Just the lobby," Sterling directed. "My men need access to the vault antechamber to set up the braces. It will take 20 minutes. Abernathy ushered the confused customers out. The tellers stepped back from their windows, whispering. Vance and Kowalski marched past the gate, setting up a danger construction sign right in front of the vault door. They were inside. No guns drawn, no masks. Just the invisible cloak of maintenance. Vance knelt by the vault wheel, opening his toolbox. He wasn't going to drill it. They were waiting for the timer lock to disengage for the morning cash transfer, which Sterling had learned happened at 9:30 a.m. sharp. They just had to wait 5 minutes. Then the heavy oak door of the manager's office opened again. A man stepped out. He wasn't a customer. He wore a sharp, 3-piece pinstripe suit, and his eyes were cold and calculating. He held a lit cigar. "What is this?" the man asked. His voice wasn't scared, it was authoritative. "State inspection," Abernathy said nervously. "Mr. Sterling here says." "I don't care what he says," the man interrupted. He walked up to Sterling, ignoring the extended hand. "In Julian Thorne, Regional Auditor for Bluegrass Trust. I spoke with the State Building Commission yesterday regarding our insurance policy. They mentioned nothing about structural defects." The air in the bank froze. Vance stopped unpacking the bag. Kowalski's hand drifted toward the rolled-up canvas. Sterling's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Well, Mr. Thorne, paperwork gets lost. Bureaucracy, you know." Thorne didn't blink. He looked at Sterling's shoes, expensive loafers, not work boots. He looked at Vance's hands, clean. No calluses from construction work. "You're a liar," Thorne said softly. He turned to Abernathy. "Call the police, now." The plan was dead. The social engineering had failed. Nail, Vance said quietly. Kowalski dropped the canvas. The heavy clatter of the M1 carbine hitting the marble floor echoed like a gunshot. He kicked the canvas open, picked up the rifle, and racked the bolt. Nobody touches a phone, Kowalski roared, his voice shaking the chandeliers. The facade of the repair crew vanished. Sterling dropped the clipboard. He pulled a snub-nose.38 revolver from his waistband. Into the office. All of you, Sterling shouted, the charm replaced by desperation. They herded the terrified tellers, the manager, and the defiant auditor into the back room. Vance moved to the teller cages. Since the vault wasn't open yet, they had to hit the drawers. It was less money, much less, but they had to salvage the job. 2 minutes. Vance yelled. He swept cash into the bags. 20s, 10s. Thorne, the auditor, stood against the wall, his hands raised but his eyes locked on Vance. You won't get far, he said calmly. I've memorized your faces. Vance paused. He walked up to Thorne. He didn't hit him. He just leaned in close. Then you better have a good memory for the sketch artist, Vance whispered. Because if you lie to them, I'll know. It was a bluff, but it made Thorne flinch. Let's go, Kowalski shouted from the door. They ran. They burst out of the bank, shedding the high-vis vests as they moved. They dove into the side door of the Econoline. Go, go, go. Sterling screamed, banging on the partition. Ray Miller floored it. The van screeched away, tires smoking. Inside the van, the mood was dark. They had the money, maybe 8,000, far short of the target, but they had lost their anonymity. He knew, Sterling said, wiping sweat from his face, his hands shaking, as he lit a cigarette. That auditor. He saw right through me. We got greedy, Vance said, staring at the floor. We relied on them being stupid. Never rely on the enemy being stupid. We're burned in Kentucky, Kowalski grunted, stripping off his coveralls. Yes, Vance agreed. The face-to-face games are over. Next time, we don't ask for permission to enter. Next time, we make our own door. He looked at Kowalski. Start sharpening your shovel, Nail. We're going to Chicago. Part 4. The Dig Oak Brook, Illinois. October 12, 1965. The world beneath the suburbs of Chicago was a kingdom of rats, rust, and echoing darkness. 30 feet below the manicured lawns and paved driveways of the First National Bank of Oak Brook, Thomas Nail Kowalski swung a pickaxe. The sound was a dull thud against the clay, swallowed instantly by the humid air of the storm drain. 3 more feet. Kowalski grunted, his voice echoing in the narrow concrete pipe. Then we hit the foundation slab. Elias Vance held the flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. The air smelled of wet earth and impending rain. They had been digging for 3 nights, accessing the bank's underbelly through a municipal storm sewer outlet a quarter-mile away. It was back-breaking work, the kind that made your bones ache and your skin crawl. Steady, Vance whispered. We're right under the safe deposit boxes. If you hit a gas line, we enter orbit. Arthur Sterling, usually the picture of elegance, was currently covered in mud, hauling buckets of displaced earth back to the main sewer line. He looked miserable. I miss the suits, Elias. I really miss the suits. Rich men don't dig, Vance replied, checking his compass. But we aren't rich yet. Above ground, the weather was turning. The forecast had called for light showers, but the sky over Illinois had bruised into a deep, angry purple. Parked on a side street 3 blocks away, Ray Miller sat in the Pontiac GTO. He was drumming his fingers on the dashboard, staring at the raindrops beginning to streak the windshield. He hated this part. The waiting, the silence. He reached under the seat and pulled out a silver flask. Just a nip to calm the nerves. He took a swig, the whiskey burning his throat. The rain picked up, drumming harder on the roof. Rat-a-tat-tat. Like gunfire. Come on, old man, Ray muttered, checking his watch. Move your ass. Down in the hole. The pickaxe finally clinked against concrete. Foundation, Kowalski announced. wiping grime from his eyes. Vance moved in with the heavy equipment, a hydraulic jack and a diamond-tipped core drill they had stolen from a construction site in Gary. He mounted the drill against the ceiling of their tunnel, the floor of the bank's vault. "Earplugs," Vance signaled. The drill screamed to life. It was a high-pitched shriek that vibrated through their teeth. Concrete dust rained down, coating them in grey powder. Slowly, agonizingly, the bit chewed through the reinforced floor. Suddenly, the resistance gave way. The drill punched through. A circle of concrete dropped, nearly crushing Vance's foot. Vance pushed a periscope, a modified tank sight, up through the hole. He saw the dim interior of the vault. Rows of metal boxes, stacks of cash on carts, ready for Monday morning. "We're in," Vance said. They widened the hole. Kowalski hoisted Sterling up first. Sterling scrambled into the vault, his flashlight dancing over the money. "Jackpot," Sterling whispered. He began tossing bags of cash down the hole to Vance and Kowalski. That was when the sound changed. It wasn't the drill anymore. It was a low roar, coming from the main sewer line behind them. Vance froze. He looked back down the tunnel. A thin trickle of water was already slithering around his boots. Then it became a stream. "Rain," Vance hissed. "Heavy rain." "So what?" Sterling called from above, holding a sack of 20s. "The storm drains, Arthur. They channel the runoff," Vance shouted, his calm demeanor cracking. "We're in a funnel." The water rose to their ankles in seconds. The roar grew louder, like a freight train approaching from the dark. "Get down here. Now," Vance screamed. "There's still more," Sterling argued, grabbing another bundle. "Leave it. Move." Sterling dropped through the hole just as a wall of black, freezing water surged into their side tunnel. It hit Kowalski first, knocking the giant man off his feet. The water was waist-deep instantly, churning with debris and trash. "The bags," Kowalski yelled, trying to grab the floating money sacks. "Forget the money. Chain up," Vance commanded. He grabbed a length of rope they had used for the gear. He lashed it around his waist and threw the end to Sterling, who was sputtering and flailing in the current. Kowalski grabbed the middle. They were fighting the full force of a flash flood in a 3-foot-wide pipe. The water rose to their chests. The money bags were washing away, disappearing into the dark torrent. "We have to go back to the outlet," Vance yelled over the roar. Against the current, it was a nightmare. They clawed their way through the rising sludge. Sterling slipped, his head going under. Vance yanked the rope, hauling him up, gasping and retching. Above ground, Ray Miller watched the street turn into a river. The gutters were overflowing. He knew what that meant for the tunnels. "Damn it," Ray cursed. He started the car. He should wait for the signal. The plan said wait for the signal, but panic, cold and sharp, pricked at his brain. "They're dead. They drowned. If I stay, the cops find me." He put the car in gear. He hesitated. His foot hovered over the gas. "Leave them." Back in the pipe, Vance found a maintenance ladder leading to a manhole. It wasn't the exit plan, but the exit plan was underwater. Up, up. He shoved Sterling toward the rungs. They burst out of a manhole cover in the middle of a flooded alleyway, gasping for air, covered in slime and grey mud. They looked like monsters rising from the swamp. They had 2 bags of money. They had lost 4. They stumbled toward the rendezvous point. The GTO was there, engine running. Ray saw them in the rearview mirror, 3 drenched, terrifying figures running through the rain. He unlocked the doors. They piled in, ruining the upholstery with sewage and mud. "You're late," Ray snapped, his voice high and thready. "I almost left." Vance sat in the passenger seat, shivering violently. He looked at Ray. He saw the car was already in gear. He saw the fear in the kid's eyes. He knew Ray had been seconds away from abandoning them. "Drive," Vance whispered, his teeth chattering. "We lost half the take," Kowalski groaned from the back, clutching the remaining wet bags. "We kept our lives," Vance said, staring at Ray Miller. "But next time, Ray, if I see your hand on that gay shift before I'm in the car, it'll break your arm." Ray didn't answer. He just drove, the wipers fighting a losing battle against the storm. The silence in the car was heavier than the mud. The water had washed away the dirt, but it had revealed the cracks in the foundation. Part 5. The Armored Decoy, Murfreesboro, Tennessee, August 3, 1966. The heat in Tennessee was different from the Midwest. It was heavy, wet, and clung to your skin like a second shirt. Ray Miller sat behind the wheel of a 1958 International Harvester armored truck. It was a lumbering, iron-sided beast that handled like a brick dragging an anchor. But today, it looked brand new. It gleamed with a fresh coat of dark green paint and gold lettering. Volunteer State Armored Services. "I hate this thing," Ray griped, wrestling the oversized steering wheel. 0 to 60 in never. "It smells like wet paint and desperation." "Just park it straight, Ray." Elias Vance's voice came from the back, where he and Kowalski were sitting in the dark, sweltering cargo hold. "We are 15 minutes ahead of the schedule. The real truck leaves Nashville at 8 a.m. It hits this branch at 9:15. It is currently 8:58. Arthur Sterling sat in the passenger seat, checking his reflection in the side mirror. He wore a crisp, tailored guard's uniform, complete with a peaked cap and a revolver on his hip. He looked like the model of security. "Relax, Ray," Sterling said, flashing a smile. "We're just here to pick up the laundry." They pulled up to the loading dock of the Merchants Bank. It was a bold move. No sneaking around. They were parking in the reserved spot, right in plain sight. Sterling hopped out, clipboard in hand. Ray stayed in the cab, keeping the engine rumbling. Inside the bank, the air conditioning was blasting. Sterling walked up to the chief teller, a woman named Mrs. Higgins who looked like she baked pies for the church choir. "Morning, ma'am," Sterling drawled, his accent thickening to a local twang. "Running a bit early today to beat the traffic on Route 41. Dispatch wants the deposits in Nashville by noon, Mrs." Higgins squinted at the clock. "You are early." "Usually. It's old Bill driving." "Bill's got the flu," Sterling lied effortlessly. "I'm the new guy. Name's Davis." He slid the clipboard across the counter. The paperwork was a perfect forgery, typed on a stolen typewriter to match the font used by the armored company. "Mrs." Higgins hesitated, then shrugged. "All right, let me buzz the boys in." She pressed a button. The heavy steel door to the loading bay buzzed. "You're up." Sterling knocked on the side of the truck. The back doors swung open. Vance and Kowalski hopped out, wearing matching uniforms. They didn't look like robbers, they looked like bored employers doing a job. They rolled a hand truck into the bank. "Load 'em up," Kowalski grunted to the bank guard, who was smoking a cigarette by the door. The guard helped them heave 6 heavy canvas bags onto the dolly. It was the weekly payroll for the local textile mill. Cash. Heavy, untraceable cash. "Heavy week?" Vance asked casually. "You know it," the guard replied. "Lot of overtime at the plant." They wheeled the cash back to the truck. Sterling signed the manifest. "Have a blessed day, ma'am." They threw the bags into the back. Vance and Kowalski climbed in. Sterling slammed the doors shut and jumped into the passenger seat. "Go," Sterling said. Ray put the truck in gear. And then he froze. "Problem," Ray whispered. Coming down the hill, about 400 yards away, was another dark green International Harvester. The gold lettering on the side caught the sun. "The real truck." "They're early," Ray hissed. "They're 15 minutes early too." "Drive!" Sterling screamed. Ray slammed the accelerator. The heavy truck lurched forward, diesel smoke belching from the exhaust. The driver of the oncoming truck saw them. He saw his own company logo on a truck that shouldn't be there. He slammed on his brakes and laid on the horn a long, mournful blast. "He's blocking the exit," Ray yelled. The real truck had swung sideways across the narrow access road. "Ram it." Vance's voice came through the partition mesh. "We have the weight. Hit the rear axle." Ray didn't hesitate. A manic grin spread across his face. This was what he lived for. He didn't aim for the cab, he wasn't a murderer, but he aimed for the back wheels of the blocking truck. Crunch. The sound of twisting metal was deafening. The fake truck, carrying momentum, plowed into the tail of the real one, spinning it out of the way like a toy. Glass shattered. The real guards were thrown around inside their cabin, but weren't hurt. Hang on. Ray laughed, wrestling the beast back onto the asphalt. They roared onto the main road, but the collision had drawn attention. A sheriff's cruiser, parked at the gas station across the street, lit up its cherry top lights. "We got a tail," Ray shouted. "We can't outrun a cruiser in this tank," Sterling yelled, clutching the dashboard. "We don't have to outrun him," Vance called out. "We just have to outlast him." "Ray, get to the quarry road. Nell, get the smoke." In the back, Kowalski grabbed a crate of smoke grenades military surplus Vance had acquired. He slid open the rear gun port. The police car was closing in, siren wailing. "Eat this," Kowalski grunted. He pulled the pins onto grenades and dropped them out the back. Thick, white phosphorus smoke billowed onto the two-lane road, creating an instant wall of fog. The police car slammed on its brakes, tires screeching, disappearing into the white cloud. Ray took the turn onto the gravel quarry road at 40 miles per hour. The armored truck tipped dangerously on two wheels, groaning under the stress. Before slamming back down, they drove for 2 miles into the woods, the truck rattling like it was falling apart. They reached the old barn, where they had stashed the Pontiac GTO the night before. "Move! Move!" Vance shouted, kicking the back doors open. They threw the bags into the trunk of the Pontiac. They stripped off the uniforms, revealing civilian clothes underneath. Ray doused the interior of the armored truck with gasoline. He tossed a lit match inside. As the Pontiac peeled out of the dirt track, the stolen truck erupted into flames behind them, destroying fingerprints, hair samples, and the fake paperwork. They hit the highway, blending into traffic just as the sirens began to converge on the quarry. Ray was breathing hard, tapping the steering wheel rapidly. "Did you see that? Did you see how I spun him?" Vance sat in the back, staring out the window. His heart was hammering, but his face was stone. "Too close," Vance said quietly. "We relied on a schedule. Schedules change. Humans are unpredictable. We got the money, didn't we?" Ray snapped, looking in the mirror. 70 grand. Easy. "We left a burning truck," Vance countered. "And a dozen witnesses who saw 4 men. The circle is getting smaller, Ray. Next time, it won't be a local sheriff. We've made enough noise to wake up the big dogs." Vance was right. As they crossed the state line, he knew the game had changed. They weren't just robbers anymore, they were a priority target. Part 6. The Hunter FBI Field Office, Cincinnati, Ohio, November 15, 1966. Special Agent Warren James did not look like the poster boy for J. Edgar Hoover's Federal Bureau of Investigation. He didn't have the square jaw or the perfectly blue-creamed hair of the young agents, fresh out of Quantico. James was 52, wore rumpled suits that smelled of stale coffee, and had eyes that looked like they had seen the bottom of too many riverbeds. He stood in front of a corkboard that covered the entire back wall of his cramped office. It was a chaotic mosaic of crime scene photos, telex reports, and maps of the Midwest. "You're chasing ghosts, Warren," said Agent Miller, no relation to Ray, a younger agent leaning against the doorframe. 4 states. 4 different Morse. Indiana was radio silence. Kentucky was a con job. Illinois was a tunnel. Tennessee was a demolition derby. It's different crews. James didn't turn round. He lit a cigarette, ignoring the no smoking sign. "No," James said, his voice like gravel. "It's the same hand. Different gloves, same hand." He stepped closer to the board, tracing a line with his finger. "Look at the timeline. September 64, May 65, October 65, August 66. The gaps are consistent. 6 to 10 months. Time to plan. Time to spend. But the methods are the distraction," James interrupted. He tapped a photo of the burnt armored truck in Tennessee. Look at the precision. In Tennessee, they rammed the rear axle, not the cab. They didn't want to kill the guards. In Indiana, they jammed the radios but didn't fire a shot. In Kentucky, they only pulled guns when the con failed. He moved to a photo of the storm drain in Illinois. And here, the shoring they used in the tunnel. It wasn't makeshift. It was military-grade engineering. They calculated the load-bearing stress of the vault floor. James walked to his desk and picked up a small, charred plastic bag. Inside was a melted lump of copper and resin found in a ditch outside Osgood, Indiana, 2 years ago. The local sheriff thought this was trash, James said. I sent it to the lab at Quantico. It's part of a spark gap transmitter, hand-built. The soldering is distinctive tight, clean, efficient. It's the work of a signal corpsman. He picked up a report from the Illinois tunnel. They found a broken drill bit in the sewer. High-carbon steel, industrial grade. The kind used in mining or heavy demolition. James pinned the bag next to the drill bit report. We aren't looking for bank robbers, kid. We're looking for blue-collar experts. An engineer, a miner, a mechanic, a grifter. He stepped back, looking at the map. He drew a circle around the tri-state area of Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana. They live here, James said, tapping the center of the circle. Cincinnati, Dayton, maybe northern Kentucky. It's the hub. They radiate out to hit, then retreat to the center. So, what do we call them? The young agent asked, skepticism fading. The press is calling them the Phantom Gang, James grunted. But I call them the mechanics, because they take things apart. The paper trail. James spent the next 3 weeks living in the archives. He wasn't looking for criminals, he was looking for purchases. He cross-referenced sales of high-end radio equipment in the Midwest, with the purchase of heavy-duty suspension parts for GM vehicles. It was a needle in a haystack. But James was patient. He found a receipt from a surplus store in Cleveland. 4 dozen military-grade smoke grenades. Sold to a Mr. Smith in July 1966. Paid in cash. But Mr. Smith had driven a car. The clerk remembered it. Not the license plate, but the sound. Sounded like a thunderstorm, the clerk had told the local police. Big engine. Dark blue paint. Maybe a Pontiac. James pulled the file on the Tennessee getaway. Witnesses reported a dark muscle car speeding away from the burning truck. He went to the phone company. He requested the call logs for payphones near the surplus store on the day of the purchase. It was a long shot, but criminals made mistakes. They got lonely. They checked in. He found a call made at 2 p.m. that day. It went to a residential number in a rural area outside of Cincinnati. A farmhouse. James dialed the number. It rang 3 times. Hello. A woman's voice. Young, tired, and Mrs. Vance. James guessed, reading the name on the reverse directory he had just pulled. No. This is Sarah. Who is this? Wrong number, ma'am. Apologies. James hung up. He looked at the directory. The house belonged to an Elias Vance. James pulled Vance's service record. U.S. Army. Signal Corps. Career. Rank. Sergeant First Class. Specialization. Radio repair and field fortifications. Honorable discharge. James felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The solder. The discipline. The engineering. Gotcha, he whispered. He didn't order a raid. Not yet. If Vance was the leader, he was smart. He would have the place sanitized. James needed to catch them in the act. Or at least catch them with the tools. He walked out of his office, grabbing his coat. Where are you going? Agent Miller asked. To buy a map of Ohio, James said, a predatory glint in his eye. And to put a wiretap on a farmhouse. The hunter had picked up the scent. The mechanics were no longer ghosts. They were targets. Part 7. The Vault, Dayton, Ohio. February 9, 1967. The City Trust Bank of Dayton was built like a mausoleum. Granite walls, iron-barred windows, and a vault door made by the Muscular Safe Company that weighed 20 tons. It was considered impenetrable by force. But Elias Vance wasn't using force. He was using history. At 2 a.m., the lobby was a tomb of shadows. Vance stood before the massive circular vault door, illuminated only by the red beam of a low-voltage work light. Taped to the steel surface next to him was a large, cyan blue sheet of paper. Blueprint dated 1928, Vance murmured, adjusting his glasses. The original installation schematic. He had bought it for $500 from a clerk in the city archives, who had a gambling debt. The bank had upgraded their alarms 3 times since 1928, but they had never moved the vault. The steel anatomy was unchanged. Drill, Vance commanded. Thomas Nail Kowalski handed him the customized drill press. They had used powerful suction cups to mount the rig directly onto the vault door. According to the schematic, Vance traced a line on the blueprint. The relocking trigger is here. If we drill 3 inches to the left, we hit the tumbler drive without tripping the glass plate. It was surgery. 1 millimeter off, and a sheet of glass inside the door would shatter, triggering spring-loaded bolts that would permanently lock the door a deadlock, and sound the alarm at the precinct. Vance began to drill. The bit was tungsten carbide, spinning at low RPM to minimize heat and noise. Whoa! A thin curl of steel peeled away. Arthur Sterling stood by the window, peering through the blinds. Patrol car passed. On schedule. Focus, Arthur, Vance hissed. He could feel the vibration of the drill in his bones. 30 minutes later, the drill punched through into the empty space of the lock mechanism. Vance withdrew the bit and inserted a medical borescope, a thin optical tube. He put his eye to the eyepiece. He could see the brass tumblers. Aligning, Vance whispered. He used a stiff wire through the hole to manually rotate the wheels. Click, click, click. He grabbed the massive wheel of the vault door. He turned it. The heavy steel bolts retracted with a deep, lubricated thunk. Open sesame, Kowalski grinned. They swung the door open. Inside, stacked on carts for the Friday transfer, was the reserve capital. Clean sweep, Vance said. No coins. Bills only. We leave in 6 minutes. They loaded the bags. No alarms. No screaming. Just the quiet shuffling of canvas and the heavy breathing of men working fast. They left the bank exactly as they found it. Except they closed the vault door and locked it back up. The bank manager wouldn't know he was robbed until he tried to open it on Monday morning. It was their masterpiece. A perfect crime. The weak link. 2 weeks later, Ray Slick Miller pulled into the parking lot of the Blue Velvet, a roadhouse bar on the outskirts of Cincinnati. He wasn't driving the nondescript work van. He wasn't driving the battered Chevy. He was behind the wheel of a canary yellow 1967 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray. The chrome side pipes gleamed under the neon lights. It was the loudest, fastest, most expensive thing on the road. Vance had warned him. Keep a low profile. Bury the money. Wait a year. But Ray was 25, and he had $40,000 in a showbox under his bed. The money burned a hole in his soul. He wanted to be seen. He walked into the bar, spinning a new gold lighter in his fingers. He ordered a round for the house. He laughed too loud. He tipped the waitress a $100 bill. What do you do for a living, honey? The waitress asked, eyeing the bill. I'm in redistribution, Ray winked, downing a whiskey. I move heavy things. In the corner of the bar, a man in a greasy cap sat nursing a beer. He wasn't a cop. He was a snitch named Lefty who sold information to the highest bidder. He sold the Corvette outside. He sold the $100 bill. He saw the calluses on Ray's hands that worked machines, not hedge funds. Lefty finished his beer, went to the payphone in the back, and dialed a number he knew by heart. The Face FBI field office, Cincinnati. Agent Warren Jean stared at the sketch on his desk. It had taken months, but Julian Thorne, the auditor from the Kentucky bank job, had finally come through. He had described the face of the operation, the man who claimed to be the inspector. The sketch showed a handsome man with slicked back hair, a sharp nose, and a charming smile. We ran it through the grifter files, Agent Miller said, dropping a folder on the desk. Match found. Arthur Sterling, con artist out of Chicago. Bouncing checks, impersonation, fraud, but no violence. Until now. James picked up the photo of Sterling. A con man needs muscle. And he needs a wheelman. The phone on James's desk rang. It was the desk sergeant. James? Yeah. A yellow Corvette. Paying with hundreds. Where? Got it. James slammed the phone down. Get your coat, James said to Miller. We have a lead at a roadhouse called the Blue Velvet. A kid throwing money around like confetti. You think it's them? I think Sterling is the face, but this kid is the leak. James grabbed his hat. We don't arrest him. We watch him. We follow him home. He's going to lead us to the engineer. The farmhouse later that night. The yellow Corvette rumbled up the long dirt driveway of the secluded farmhouse. Ray was drunk, singing along to the radio. He didn't notice the dark sedan, parked a mile down the road, lights off. He didn't see James watching through binoculars. James saw Ray stumble out of the car. He saw the porch light flick on. He saw a man step out to meet him, a man with a lean build and the posture of a soldier. Elias Vance. Vance looked at the yellow car, then at Ray. Even from a mile away, James could see the anger in Vance's body language. Vance shoved Ray against the car, pointing at the flashy vehicle. That's him, James whispered, lowering the binoculars. That's the architect. He wrote down the address. He had the names. Sterling, Miller, Vance. Do we take them now? Agent Miller asked, reaching for the radio. No, James said, his voice cold. They have a stash somewhere. A vault of their own. And I want to know who the fourth man is, the big one. If we move now, we might miss the evidence. We wait. Inside the farmhouse, the celebration was over. The circle had closed. Vance didn't know it yet. But the silence he cherished so much had just been broken by the roar of a yellow Corvette. Part 8. The Leak, Cincinnati, Ohio. March 10, 1967. Arthur Sterling stood in the back of a dim post office in downtown Cincinnati, staring at the corkboard near the sorting room. His hands, usually steady enough to pick a lock or light a lady's cigarette, were trembling. There, nestled between a fraudster from Cleveland and a car thief from Detroit, was a flyer. Wanted by the FBI. Unknown subject, the face. Suspect is wanted in connection with bank larceny in Kentucky. Caution. Armed and dangerous. The sketch was crude, but the eyes were his. The hairline was his. Sterling pulled his hat low, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He walked out into the cold rain, feeling every pair of eyes on the street burning into him. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was a headline. The motel 10 miles away. At the Starlight Motel, Ray Miller was unraveling. Elias Vance had kicked him out of the farmhouse 3 days ago after the Corvette incident. Get rid of the car. Get your head straight. Don't come back until you're sober, Vance had ordered. Ray hadn't gotten sober. He lay on a stained mattress, a bottle of bourbon on the nightstand and a lit joint hanging from his lip. The room spun. Next to him sat a girl named Donna, a local waitress he had picked up. She was looking at the stack of cash Ray had carelessly left on the dresser. You really a mechanic, Ray? She asked, tracing the rim of her glass. Mechanics don't carry rolls like that. Ray laughed, a wet, sloppy sound. He sat up, his ego bruised by Vance's rejection and fueled by the alcohol. I fix things, Ray slurred. I fix the economy. Me and the old man. We take what the banks steal. We're like Robin Hoods, but with better cars. He grabbed a handful of cash and threw it in the air. We hit the big ones. Indiana, Tennessee. I drove the truck through fire, baby. Through fire? Donna smiled, but her eyes were sharp. She stood up. I need to use the powder room. She went into the bathroom and locked the door. She turned on the faucet to mask her voice. Then she climbed out the small window into the alleyway. She ran to the payphone at the gas station next door. She didn't care about Robin Hood. She cared about the $500 reward the local sheriff had posted for information on the Phantom Gang. The Intercept the farmhouse. Elias Vance sat in his workshop in the barn. He wasn't building a bomb. He was listening. For the last week, he had kept his wideband receiver scanning the frequencies. Paranoia had become his only friend. He scanned the police bands, the fire bands, even the shortwave taxi dispatch. Then, he heard it. It wasn't on the police band. It was on a frequency usually reserved for federal utility crews. Subject to his mobile. Leaving the Starlight Motel. Headed east on Route 50. Copy. Maintain distance. Don't spook him. We want him to lead us to the farmhouse. Vance froze. The voice was crisp, professional, federal. Subject to was Ray. They were tailing him, and Ray was heading here. Vance looked around the barn. The tools. The maps. The life he had tried to build out of stolen money. It was over. The sanctuary was compromised. He keyed the mic on his own private radio, set up a short-range burst transmitter he had given to Kowalski, who was staying in a trailer park 5 miles south. Nail, Vance said, his voice void of emotion. Code black. The roof is on fire. Meet me at the scrapyard. Bring the heavy kit. He didn't call Ray. He didn't call Sterling. There was no time to argue. The betrayal. Ray Miller pulled the battered Chevy he had sold the Corvette, at least, into the farmhouse driveway. He stumbled out, clutching a bottle, ready to apologize to Vance. Boss, Ray yelled. I'm back. I'm clean. He didn't see Vance standing on the porch, holding the M1911 pistol at his side. He didn't see the sorrow in the older man's eyes. You led them here, Ray, Vance said quietly. What? Ray blinked, swaying. No, I was careful. Turn around. Ray turned. At the end of the long driveway, 3 cars had just pulled off the main road. They didn't have lights on. They were creeping forward like sharks. Feds, Ray whispered, the alcohol evaporating instantly, replaced by cold terror. Elias, I didn't know. Get in the car, Vance commanded. You drive. One last time. The escaped Vance jumped into the passenger seat. Ray scrambled behind the wheel. Through the fields. Vance ordered. Don't touch the brakes. No brake lights. Ray gunned the engine. The Chevy tore through the wooden fence, bouncing violently across the frozen cornfield behind the house. Behind them, the lead FBI car driven by Agent James lit up. Sirens wailed, cutting through the night. They're moving. James yelled into his radio. All units, cut them off at the county road. It was a race through the dark. Ray fought the steering wheel as the car fishtailed on the mud. Vance watched the pursuit in the mirror. They were gaining. Nail, Vance screamed into the radio handset. Now, Thomas Kowalski had parked his pickup truck at the intersection of the field road and the highway. As the FBI cars roared toward the intersection to intercept the Chevy, Kowalski released the brake on a massive trailer he was towing loaded with scrap metal and old engine blocks. The trailer rolled backward, blocking the narrow 2-lane highway completely. The FBI cars slammed on their brakes, skidding to a halt inches from the wall of scrap metal. Ray's Chevy burst out of the cornfield, shot across the road past Kowalski's truck, and disappeared into the dark woods on the other side. The meeting an hour later, under the rusted awning of an abandoned gas station 20 miles away. The team reunited. Sterling arrived last, shaking, clutching the wanted flyer. Kowalski was there, grim and silent. Ray was sitting on the ground, crying. They know who we are, Sterling said, his voice cracking. I saw my face, Elias. I saw my face. We are burned, Vance said. He paced in front of them. They have the farmhouse. They have our prince. They have the money we buried there. We have nothing. Ray looked up, horrified. We have our freedom. For now, Vance said. But we can't run on empty pockets. South America costs money. No identities cost money. It's over, Kowalski grunted. We scatter. If we scatter, they pick us off one by one, Vance said sharply. James is good. He'll find you in a week. He looked at his terrified, broken crew. There is only one way out. We need enough money to disappear forever. Enough to buy a plane, not a ticket. He pulled a map from his jacket. It was wrinkled and stained. He pointed to a city, street. Elias Vance said. The Federal Reserve shipment. Next week. That's suicide, Sterling whispered. That's a fortress. It's a hub, Vance corrected. And I have a plan. But it requires all of us. No more mistakes. No more drinking. We do this, and we vanish. Or we die trying. Ray wiped his eyes. He looked at Vance. He saw the resolve. It was the only thing holding them together. I'm in, Ray whispered. I'm in, Kowalski said. Sterling looked at the rain falling around them. He had nowhere else to go. What's the plan? Vance looked at the map. We don't break in, Vance said. We become the police. Part 9. The Last Masquerade Street. Lewis, Missouri. January 12, 1968. The plan was a desperate gamble born of necessity. It relied on the one thing Elias Vance knew the police respected more than the law. Their own brotherhood. At 8:45 a.m., a call went out to the street. Lewis Dispatch. A frantic voice, Arthur Sterling, huddled in a phone booth 3 blocks away, reported a code 30 at the Mercantile Trust Company. Armed men entering the bank. Shots fired. 2 minutes later, a squad car screamed up to the front entrance. It was a 1967 Plymouth Fury, painted in Precise Street. Lewis police livery. Elias Vance, Thomas Nail Kowalski, and Ray Miller burst out of the car. They were dressed in immaculate police uniforms, badges shown on their chests. Vance wore the stripes of a sergeant. They carried shotguns and revolvers, not hidden, but openly displayed. Police. Move. Move. Vance shouted, storming through the revolving doors. The lobby froze. Customers gasped. The bank guards, seeing the uniforms, lowered their own weapons, relief washing over their faces. Everyone on the floor. Kowalski bellowed, his voice booming with authority. We have reports of gunmen in the building. Stay down for your own safety. It was the ultimate inversion. They weren't robbing the bank, they were securing it. Manager. Vance barked, marching to the counter. Who has the keys to the cage? We need to secure the assets immediately. The suspects are believed to be in the ventilation system. The manager, a terrified man named Mr. Henderson, fumbled for his keys. I have them, officer. My God, are they inside? Open it, Vance ordered, pushing Henderson toward the vault. We need to lock down inside the vault until backup arrives. It was working. The fear of an unseen threat made the sheep trust the wolf. Henderson opened the grill. Vance and Kowalski stepped inside, effectively taking the bank's cash reserves hostage under the guise of protection. Ray Miller stood guard at the door, hand on his holster, sweating profusely. His job was to lock the front doors to keep the robbers in. In reality, he was locking the police out. Bag it, Vance whispered to Kowalski once they were inside the counting room. 2 minutes. No coins. Kowalski unrolled the evidence bag's heavy canvas sacks and started sweeping the cash. It was the Federal Reserve shipment Vance had predicted. Stacks of fresh, uncirculated $100 bills. Millions. We're rich, Elias, Kowalski breathed, his hands shaking as he grabbed the bundles. Vance checked his watch. Ray, bring the car around back. Arthur, get the ambulance ready. That was the exit strategy. A stolen ambulance waiting in the alley. They would leave carrying wounded officers, the money bags under sheets, and disappear into the medical traffic. But then, the phone on the manager's desk rang. It wasn't the internal line. It was the direct external line. Vance stared at it. He picked it up. Hello. Good morning, Sergeant Vance, a gravelly voice said. Vance felt his blood turn to ice. He knew that voice. It's Agent James, Elias. Look out the window. Vance turned slowly. Through the slats of the blinds, he looked out at the street. The street was empty. The pedestrians were gone. The traffic had stopped. But on the rooftops across the street, He saw the glint of scopes, and blocking the intersections were not local patrol cars, but heavy black sedans and FBA barricades. "I knew you'd come for the reserve shipment," James said calmly. "It was the only port big enough to buy your way out of the country. You're surrounded. 3 blocks deep. There is no ambulance. We picked up Sterling 2 minutes ago." Vance dropped the phone. The line went dead. "The collapse they have, Arthur," Vance said, his voice hollow. "It's a trap." "What?" Ray yelled from the door, panic rising in his throat. "What do you mean?" "They're outside," Vance said. "All of them. We have hostages," Ray screamed, pulling his gun. He grabbed a woman near the door, a teller. "We have hostages." "Ray, don't," Vance shouted, but the discipline was gone. Ray dragged the screaming woman to the glass doors, using her as a shield. "Back off," Ray yelled at the empty street, "or she dies." Crack. The sound was sharp and dry, like a branch snapping. The front window shattered. A sniper's bullet, aimed perfectly, didn't hit Ray. It hit the door frame inches from his head, showering him in glass. Ray flinched, releasing the woman. She scrambled away. "Return fire," Kowalski roared. He racked his shotgun and fired blindly through the broken window. Boom. Boom. "No." Vance tackled Kowalski. "Save the ammo." "Back door. Move." The illusion of the police officers was gone. They were rats in a cage now. They ran for the rear exit. Vance kicked the door open, leading into a narrow brick alleyway. "Clear," Vance shouted. They sprinted into the alley. The plan was to reach the next street, steal a car, anything. But the alley wasn't empty. At the far end, 2 FBI agents stepped out from behind a dumpster. "Federal agents." "Drop it." Kowalski didn't drop it. He raised the shotgun. The alley erupted in gunfire. The acoustics magnified the sound into a deafening roar. Bullets chipped the brick walls, sending red dust flying. Vance fired his revolver, suppressing the agents, forcing them to duck. "Ray, cover fire." Ray was hyperventilating, firing wildly into the air, into the ground. "I can't die. I can't die." Ray was screaming. Then, a burst of submachine gun fire from a rooftop above raked the alley. "Nail!" Vance screamed. Thomas Kowalski grunted. A wet, heavy sound. He spun around, clutching his thigh. A second bullet caught him in the shoulder. The giant man crumpled to the wet pavement. "Tom!" Vance scrambled to him, dragging him behind a concrete piling. "Leave me," Kowalski gasped, blood bubbling between his lips. Legs gone, bones shattered. "I'm not leaving you," Vance yelled, reloading his revolver with shaking hands. "You have to," Kowalski wheezed. He shoved the heavy bag of money toward Vance. "Take it, run." Vance looked at the bag. Then he looked at the end of the alley. More agents were pouring in. Sirens were wailing from the street side. They were boxed in. "Ray!" Vance shouted. "Help me lift him." But Ray was gone. Ray Miller, the driver, the kid who wanted to be famous, had bolted. He had seen the gap in the fence and taken it, leaving his team behind. Vance was alone with a dying man and a bag of useless paper. "Give it up, Elias." James's voice echoed from a megaphone at the end of the alley. "It's over. Don't make us kill you." Vance looked at his gun. 2 bullets left. He looked at Kowalski, whose eyes were glazing over. He looked at the sky. It was a beautiful, clear winter day. A perfect day for a drive. Vance dropped the gun. He raised his hands. "Don't shoot," Vance screamed, his voice cracking. "Man down. We need a medic." He wasn't fighting for the money anymore. He was fighting for his friend's life. As the FBI agents swarmed them, kicking the gun away and pinning Vance to the ground, he didn't struggle. He turned his head to see James walking slowly down the alley, stepping over the puddles. James stood over him. He didn't look triumphant. He looked tired. The radio silence was clever. "Elias," James said, looking down at the handcuffed engineer. "But you can't jam the whole world." Vance closed his eyes as the handcuffs clicked shut. The signal was finally dead. Part 10. The verdict. Federal District Court, St. Louis, Missouri, October 4, 1968. The courtroom was packed. Reporters from the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, and the Post-Dispatch fought for space on the wooden benches. The trial of the mechanics had become a national sensation, a final flashbulb moment before the chaotic end of the decade. Elias Vance sat at the defense table, wearing a suit provided by his public defender. He looked thinner, his face pale from months in solitary confinement, but his eyes were clear. Beside him sat Arthur Sterling, who looked aged and defeated, stripped of his charm. Thomas Neil Kowalski was absent. He was still in the prison hospital, recovering from the amputation of his right leg below the knee. The witness stand was occupied by Ray Slick Miller. Ray looked small. He wouldn't meet Vance's eyes. He mumbled his answers, confirming dates, locations, and methods. He had been found 3 days after the raid, shivering in a drainage pipe 5 miles from the bank, weeping. He had traded his loyalty for a chance at parole in 20 years. Mr. Miller, the prosecutor boomed. Who planned the operations? Who built the radio jammers? Who designed the tunnel? Ray looked at his hands. It was Elias. It was always Elias. He was the architect. A murmur went through the crowd. Vance didn't flinch. He just wrote something on a notepad. Gravity always wins. The speech when it was time for the sentencing statements. Sterling declined to speak. He just stared at the floor. Vance stood up. The room went silent. The judge, a stern man named Blackwood, peered over his glasses. Mr. Vance, Judge Blackwood said, you have been convicted of 12 counts of bank robbery, conspiracy, and assault on federal officers. Do you have anything to say before I pass sentence? Vance adjusted his tie. He didn't look at the judge. He looked at the back of the room, where Agent Warren Jeem sat, smoking a pipe, a privilege allowed to the victor. Your Honor, Vance began, his voice steady. The prosecution calls me a thief. They say I took what wasn't mine. Perhaps that is true by the letter of the law. He paused, resting his hands on the railing. But I grew up on a farm that fed this country for 50 years. When the bad harvest came, the bank didn't offer help. They sent a sheriff and a foreclosure notice. They took the land. They took the house. They took the dignity of honest work. They called it economics. I simply applied their own logic back to them. He looked at Ray Miller, who was trembling. We didn't hurt civilians. We didn't rob the teller's pockets. We targeted the reserves, the insured capital, the numbers on a ledger. I am not sorry for what I did to the banks. I am only sorry that I led good men into a war they couldn't win. Is that all? The judge asked, unimpressed. Yes, Your Honor. The machine is broken. I just tried to fix it. The sentence, the gavel fell like a guillotine. Ray Miller, 25 years, eligible for parole in 15. Thomas Kowalski, 40 years. Arthur Sterling, 40 years. Elias Vance, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, to be served at the United States Penitentiary, Leavenworth. As the bailiffs led Vance away, he stopped near the aisle where Jeem sat. Jeem stood up. He didn't smile. He nodded, once. A soldier acknowledging an adversary. Checkmate, Elias, Jeems whispered. It was a good game, Warren, Vance replied softly. But you can't catch the signal anymore. It's already in the air. The aftermath, Leavenworth Penitentiary. 5 years later, 1973. The visiting room was grey and cold. Warren Jeems sat on one side of the glass partition. He was retired now, the lines on his face deeper, his hair completely white. Vance sat on the other side. He looked older, but the sharp intelligence was still there. He was working in the prison library, fixing the radios for the guards. How are they? Vance asked. Kowalski died last winter, Jeems said. Pneumonia. It took him quick. He sent you his regards. Vance closed his eyes for a moment. And Arthur, running a cigarette smuggling ring in Atlanta, has doing fine. Has a survivor. And Ray. Jeems sighed. Ray got parole early. He was out for 6 months. Got drunk, crashed a car into a bridge abutment. He didn't make it. Vance nodded slowly. The speed finally caught him. Why did you do it, Elias? James asked, the question that had plagued him for years. You could have been chief engineer at or Ford. You could have been anything. Vance smiled, a sad, distant smile. I wanted to see if it was possible, Warren, to make the world go quiet. Just for a minute. To stop the noise. He leaned forward, touching the glass. And for those 90 seconds in Indiana, it was perfect silence. Epilogue. The signal fades, the 1960s died, and the 1970s brought a new kind of crime. The era of the gentleman bandit, the mechanic, and the craftsman was over. It was replaced by violent cartels, digital fraud, and cameras on every corner. But in the dive bars of the Rust Belt, the story of the mechanics became folklore. Old men would tell the tale of the phantom gang who robbed banks without firing a shot, who drove through walls of smoke, and who vanished into the earth. They said that on certain nights, if you tuned your radio to the low VHF band near Osgood, Indiana, and listened through the static, you could still hear the hum of Elias Vance's transmitter. The frequency of silence. End of story.